Ecology is the study of the relationships between living organisms, including humans, and their physical environment. It seeks to understand the vital connections between plants and animals in the world around them. Ecology also provides information about the benefits of ecosystems and how we can use Earth's resources in ways to leave the environment healthy for future generations. In understanding the given relationship, ecology encompasses aspects such as population growth, competition, symbiotic ecological relationships, trophic relations, biodiversity, migration, and physical environment interactions. And to further deepen our knowledge, let us dive in the world of ecology.
Levels of organization are structures in nature, usually defined by part-whole relationships, with things at the higher levels being composed of things at the next lower level. Typical levels of organization in ecology includes individual, population, community, ecosystem, biomes, and biosphere levels. An individual is any living thing or organism. Individuals do not breed with individuals from other groups. It is the lowest level of organization, which includes both unicellular and multicellular organisms. All the living species in this level exhibits all the characteristics required for the existence of life.
A population is a group of organisms belonging to the same species that live in the same area and interact with one another. Therefore, population ecology studies the rise and fall in the number of a species. It deals with the dynamics of species populations and how these populations interact with the environment, such as birth and death rates, and immigration and emigration. But we do have to note that populations are different in one time and place than they are in another. In order to understand why populations are different from time to time and place to place, a population ecologist needs to know a few things about a population like its density. A population's density changes due to a number of factors, all of which are pretty intuitive. It increases when new individuals are either born or immigrate, that is move in, and it decreases because of deaths or emigration or individuals moving out. Another thing a population ecologist needs to know is dispersion. Dispersion is the process that involves the movement of an individual or multiple individuals away from the population. A question now is, what drives population growth? There are all kinds of factors that drive population growth and they can vary radically from one organism to the next. To understand how fast or slow and high or low a population actually grows, you need to focus on what's keeping growth in check. These factors are appropriately called limiting factors. The common limiting factors in an ecosystem are food, water, habitat, and mate. The availability of these factors will affect the carrying capacity of an environment. Population ecologists group limiting factors like these into two different categories: density dependent and density independent. Density dependent limitations are factors that inhibit growth because of the environmental stress caused by population size. When density dependent limitations start to kick in and start to limit a population's growth, that means that the habitat's carrying capacity has been reached. The other type of limiting factor, the density independent ones, have nothing to do with how many individuals there are or how dense the population is. A lot of times, these limitations are described in terms of some catastrophe, like a volcanic eruption. In any case, some crucial aspect of the population's lifestyle changes enough that it makes it harder to get by.
It includes all the populations in a specific area at a given time. A community includes populations of organisms of different species. Naturally, competition is a really important part of how different species interact when their habitats overlap. These interactions between species are what define ecological communities. Because some resources are finite, it becomes the limiting factors for certain population, and the population can only get as big as these factors will allow. Therefore, elimination occurs between populations. This is competitive exclusion principle. But if competitive exclusion principle is the natural law of land, why not the mass extinction? The reasons are: first, not all resources are limiting, and second, most species are adaptable enough to find a way to survive in the face of competition through niche. Fundamental niche allows some species from living the lifestyle that they could have if nobody else competed with them at all. Few, if any, species ever get to live that way. Instead, because of the need to avoid competitive exclusion in order to survive, many species end up with a different job, and hence lifestyle, and that's called a realized niche. When similar species settle into separate niches that let them coexist, the phenomenon is known as resource partitioning. So if organisms can do this, if they can behave in ways that help minimize competition while increasing their odds for survival, it follows that traits associated with this behavior would start being selected favorably. After all, that's what natural selection is for. When this happens, it's known as character displacement. Character displacement happens when the traits of two or more populations had actually diverged to help facilitate the partitioning of resources. But there are also kinds of interspecies interaction in which species actually join forces in order to survive. In ecology, symbiosis is a close ecological relationship between the individuals of two or more different species. In these cases, species in a community actually manage to avoid competition that benefit one, if not both, of the parties involved. First is mutualism, a symbiotic relationship where both organisms benefit. Second is commensalism, a symbiotic relationship where one organism benefits and one does not benefit but is unharmed. And third is parasitism, a symbiotic relationship where one organism benefits and one is harmed. Interactions between species are inevitable because it is required for survival. But of all the ways that each species interact on this planet, maybe the one that fascinates us the most is predation. Predation involves killing another organism for its energy. Feeding relationships show what organisms eat or are eaten by others, and through this the levels of organization in an ecosystem. This can be shown in food chains, which added together to make food webs for a habitat. Feeding relationship includes the producer-consumer relationship, where a producer produces its own food and energy. Then the consumer consumes or eats the producers. On the other hand, predator-prey relations refer to the interactions between two species, where one species is the hunted food source for the other. Lastly, parasite-host relationship is where an organism, the parasite, lives off of another organism, the host, harming it and possibly causing death.
Ecosystem is a word that we hear a lot. I think most of us would be a little stumped if somebody actually asked us what an ecosystem is, or how one works, or why they are important. I find it helps to think of an ecosystem, a collection of living and non-living things interacting in a specific place. It is the complex of living organisms, their physical environment, and all their interrelationships in a particular unit of space. It is the integrated study of living or biotic and non-living abiotic components of ecosystems and their interactions within an ecosystem framework. This science examines how ecosystems work and relate this to their components such as chemicals, bedrock, soil, plants, and animals. An ecosystem can be categorized into its abiotic components including minerals, climate, soil, water, sunlight, and all other non-living elements, and its biotic constituents consisting of all its living members. Organisms in an ecosystem organize themselves into a trophic structure, with each organism situating itself in a certain place in the food chain. All of the energy in an ecosystem moves around within this structure. Organisms in food chains are grouped into categories called trophic levels. Roughly speaking, these levels are divided into producers, or the first trophic levels, consumers, or the second, third, and fourth trophic levels, and decomposers. Primary producers, also known as autotrophs, make their own food. They make up the first level of every food chain. Autotrophs are usually plants or one-celled organisms. Nearly all autotrophs use a process called photosynthesis to create food or a nutrient called glucose from sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. The second trophic level consists of organisms that eat the producers. These are called primary consumers or herbivores. Secondary consumers eat the herbivores, and the tertiary consumers eat the secondary consumers. The treativores and decomposers are the final part of food chains. The treativores are organisms that eat non-living plant and animal remains. For example, scavengers such as vultures that eat dead animals. The food chain describes who eats whom in the wild. Every living thing, from one-celled algae to giant blue whales, needs food to survive. Each food chain is a possible pathway that energy and nutrients can follow through the ecosystem. For example, a leaf produces its own food from sunlight. A worm eats the leaf. A bird eats the worm. When the bird dies, bacteria break down its body, returning it to the soil where it provides nutrients for plants like grass. A food web consists of all the food chains in a single ecosystem. Each living thing in an ecosystem is part of multiple food chains. Each food chain is one possible path that energy and nutrients may take as they move through the ecosystem. All of the interconnected and overlapping food chains in an ecosystem make up a food web.
A biome is a large area characterized by its vegetation, soil, climate, and wildlife. It is also called Major Life Zone, the largest geographic biotic unit, a major community of plants and animals with similar life forms and environmental conditions. Temperature and water are important abiotic factors that affect species distribution. Temperature affects the physiology of living things as well as the density and state of water. It exerts an important influence on living organisms because few can survive at temperatures below 0 degrees Celsius due to metabolic constraints. It is also rare for them to survive at temperature exceeding 45 degrees Celsius. This is a reflection of evolutionary response to typical temperatures. Temperatures can limit the distribution of living things. Animals faced with temperature fluctuations may respond with adaptations, such as migration, in order to survive. Water is required by all living things because it is critical for cellular processes. Since terrestrial organisms lose water to the environment by simple diffusion, they have evolved many adaptations to retain water. Aquatic biomes include both freshwater and marine biomes. Freshwater biomes are bodies of water surrounded by land, such as ponds, rivers, and lakes, that have a salt content of less than 1%. Marine biomes cover close to 3/4 of Earth's surfaces. Marine biomes include the ocean, coral reefs, and estuaries. Grasslands are open regions that are dominated by grass and have a warm, dry climate. There are two types of grasslands: tropical grasslands, or sometimes called savanna, and temperate grasslands. Savannas are found closer to the equator and can have a few scattered trees. Temperate grasslands are found further away from the equator. They do not have any trees or shrubs and receive less precipitation than savanna. Forests are dominated by trees and cover about one-third of the earth. Forests contain much of the world's terrestrial biodiversity, including insects, birds, and mammals. Deserts are dry areas where rainfall is less than 50 centimeters or 20 inches per year. They cover around 20% of Earth's surface. Deserts can be either cold or hot, although most of them are found in subtropical areas. Because of their extreme conditions, there is not as much biodiversity found in deserts as in other biomes. A tundra has extremely inhospitable conditions, with the lowest measured temperatures of any of the 5 major biomes. It also has poor quality soil nutrients and short summers. There are two types of tundra: Arctic and Alpine. The tundra does not have much biodiversity, and vegetation is simple, including shrubs, grasses, mosses, and lichens. The Arctic tundra is found north of boreal forests, and the alpine tundra is found on mountains where the altitude is too high for trees to survive.
Geochemists define the biosphere as being the total sum of living organisms, the biomass or biota as referred to by biologists and ecologists. It is a relatively thin life-supporting stratum of Earth's surface extending from a few kilometers into the atmosphere to the deep-sea vents of the ocean. The biosphere is a global ecosystem composed of living organisms and the non-living factors from which they derive energy and nutrients.
Living things need energy to grow, breathe, reproduce, and move. Energy cannot be created from nothing, so it must be transferred through the ecosystem. To further discuss the transfers of energy in an ecosystem, here are the pyramids of energy, biomass, and numbers. Energy pyramid is sometimes referred to as an ecological pyramid or trophic pyramid. It is a graphical representation between various organisms in an ecosystem. The order of these bars is based on who feeds on whom. It represents the energy flow in the ecosystem, and each bar has a different width depending on the quantity of the element being measured. An energy pyramid is useful in quantifying the transfer of energy from one organism to another along a food chain. Energy is higher at the bottom of the pyramid, but it decreases as you move up through the trophic levels.
A pyramid of biomass is a graphical representation of biomass present in a unit area of various trophic levels. In ecological terms, biomass refers to the total mass of all living or organic matter that inhabit an ecosystem at any given point of time. Therefore, this pyramid shows the relationship between biomass and trophic level, quantifying the biomass available in each trophic level of an energy community at a given time. There are two main types of biomass pyramid: inverted pyramid of biomass and the upright one. In an upright pyramid, a rabbit or deer feeds on grass. The rabbit or deer is in turn eaten by a fox, which is eaten by a lion. The grass sits at the bottom of the biomass pyramid as it can feed dozens of rabbits or deers because of its biomass. The lion occupies the highest level of the pyramid. In the case of an inverted pyramid, an example is the aquatic ecosystem. The mass of the phytoplankton, the main producers of the ecosystem, is less than that of the consumers, which are generally fish, which is in turn eaten by sharks and whales.
A pyramid of numbers is a graphical representation that shows the number of organisms at each trophic level. It is an upright pyramid in light of the fact that in an ecosystem, the producers are always more in number than other trophic levels. The reason for the pyramid shape is that there must always be enough plants to produce food at the bottom. Otherwise, the entire food chain would collapse. At the higher level, no predator can be as common as its prey. Otherwise, the population of both animals would soon be wiped out. This pyramid doesn't consider the biomass of organisms. Neither does it indicate the energy transmitted or the utilization of energy by the organisms involved. Numbers pyramid can be convenient since counting is usually a simple task and can be undertaken over the years to track the changes in a given ecosystem.
A nutrient cycle is defined as the cyclic pathway by which nutrients pass through in order to be recycled and reutilized. The pathway comprises cells, organisms, community, and ecosystem. In the process, nutrients get absorbed, transferred, released, and reabsorbed. It is a natural recycling system of mineral nutrients. Nutrient cycling is a cyclic process that encompasses the movement of nutrients from the physical environment to living organisms and back to the environment. Nutrients are present on the earth where they are recycled, transformed into different forms, and reutilized.
Carbon is the main constituent of all the living cells. All the organic matter and biomolecules contain carbon. On our dynamic planet, carbon is able to move from one part to another as a part of the carbon cycle. Carbon moves from the atmosphere to plants in the form of carbon dioxide. Through the process of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide is pulled from the air to produce food by the plants for their growth. Carbon moves from plants to animals. Through food chains, the carbon that is in plants moves to animals that eat them. Animals that eat other animals get the carbon from their food too. Carbon moves from plants and animals to soils. When plants and animals die, their bodies, wood, and leaves decays, bringing the carbon into the ground. Some is buried and will become fossil fuels in millions and millions of years. Carbon moves from living things to the atmosphere. Each time we exhale, we are releasing carbon dioxide gas into the atmosphere. Animals and plants need to get rid of carbon dioxide gas through a process called respiration. Carbon moves from fossil fuels to the atmosphere when fuels are burned. When human burns fossil fuels to power factories, power plants, cars, and trucks, most of the carbon quickly enters the atmosphere as carbon dioxide gas. And lastly, carbon moves from the atmosphere to the oceans. The oceans and other bodies of water absorb some carbon from the atmosphere. The carbon is dissolved into the water.
The nitrogen cycle is a repeating cycle of processes during which nitrogen moves through both living and non-living things. The atmosphere, soil, water, plants, animals, and bacteria. In order to move through the different parts of the cycle, nitrogen must change forms such as gas, nitrogen oxide, nitrogen dioxide, and many more. There are 5 stages in the nitrogen cycle: fixation, mineralization, nitrification, immobilization, and denitrification. The first stage, nitrogen moves from the atmosphere into the soil. However, this nitrogen is unavailable to plants because the gaseous form cannot be used directly by plants without undergoing a transformation. Hence, nitrogen fixation happens where atmospheric nitrogen through chemical process is assimilated into organic compounds, especially by certain microorganisms as part of the nitrogen cycle. Fixation converts nitrogen in the atmosphere into forms that plants can absorb through their root systems. The second stage, mineralization, happens when microbes act on organic material, such as animal manure or decomposing plant or animal material, and begin to convert it to a form of nitrogen that can be used by plants. The third stage, nitrification, occurs when the ammonia in the soils produced during mineralization is converted into compounds called nitrites and nitrates. Nitrates could be used by plants and animals that consume the plants, but nitrates cannot be used directly. The process of nitrification is important to plants as it produces available nitrogen that can be absorbed by the plants through their root systems. The fourth stage of the nitrogen cycle is immobilization, where soil microorganisms like plants pull nitrogen from the soil when the residues of decomposing plants do not contain enough nitrogen. Immobilization is important because it helps control and balance the amount of nitrogen in the soils by tying it up or immobilizing the nitrogen in microorganisms. In the third stage of the nitrogen cycle, nitrogen returns to the air as nitrates are converted to atmospheric nitrogen by bacteria through the process we call denitrification. This results in an overall loss of nitrogen from soils as the gaseous form of nitrogen moves into the atmosphere. Oxygen cycle, along with the carbon cycle and nitrogen cycle, plays an essential role in the existence of life on the Earth. The oxygen cycle is a biological process which helps in maintaining the oxygen level by moving through the three main spheres of the Earth, which are the atmosphere, lithosphere, and the biosphere. Stage 1. All green plants during the process of photosynthesis release oxygen back into the atmosphere as a byproduct. Stage 2. All aerobic organisms use free oxygen for respiration. Stage 3. Animals exhale carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere, which is again used by the plants during photosynthesis. Now, oxygen is balanced within the atmosphere.
Many processes work together to keep Earth's water moving in a cycle. There are 5 processes at work in the hydrologic cycle: condensation, precipitation, infiltration, runoff, and evapotranspiration. These occur simultaneously and except for precipitation, continuously. Condensation is the process of water changing from a vapor to a liquid. Water vapor in the air rises mostly by convection. This means that warm, humid air will rise, while cooler air will flow downward. As the warmer air rises, the water vapor will lose energy, causing its temperature to drop. The water vapor then has a change of state into liquid or ice. Precipitation is water being released from clouds as rain, sleet, snow, or hail. Precipitation begins after water vapor, which has condensed in the atmosphere, becomes too heavy to remain in atmospheric air currents, and falls. A portion of the precipitation that reaches the Earth's surface seeps into the ground through the process called infiltration. However, precipitation that reaches the surface of the Earth but does not infiltrate the soil is called runoff. Runoff will eventually drain into creeks, streams, and rivers, adding a large amount of water to the flow. Lastly, evapotranspiration is water evaporating from the ground and transpiration by plants. Evapotranspiration is the way water vapor re-enters the atmosphere. Evaporation occurs when radiant energy from the sun hits water, causing the water molecules to become so active that some of them rise into the atmosphere as vapor. Transpiration occurs when plants take in water through the roots and release it through the leaves.
The study of ecology is important in ensuring people understand the impact of their actions on the life of the planet as well as on each other. Ecology helps in environmental conservation. Ecology allows us to understand the effects our actions have on our environment. With this information, it helps guide conservation efforts by first showing the primary means by which the problems we experience within our environment begin, and by following this identification process, it shows us where our efforts would have the biggest effect.
Second, it ensures proper resource allocation. Ecology equally allows us to see the purpose of each organism in the web of connectivity that makes up the ecosystem. With this knowledge, we are able to ascertain which resources are essential for the survival of the different organisms. This is very fundamental when it comes to assessing the needs of human beings who have the biggest effect on the ecosystem.
Ecology enhances energy conservation. Energy conservation and ecology is connected in that it aids in understanding the demands different energy sources have on the environment. Consequently, it is good for decision making in terms of deciding resources for use as well as how to efficiently convert them into energy.
Lastly, it promotes eco-friendliness. With all the information and research obtained from ecology, it ultimately promotes eco-friendliness. It makes people aware of their environment and encourages the adoption of a lifestyle that protects the ecology of life owing to the understanding they have about it.